Okay, thank you, Dirk. And hopefully you can hear me okay. If you can't, you can always leave, or if there's a problem, just leave a comment or a question, and Dirk will be monitoring those to respond to those throughout the webinar. So this is the third in my Tableau Tips webinar series. The first two were last week and the week before, and those videos are both up on my blog at viswiz.com, and they're also on my YouTube channel. I did notice that somebody has already asked a question if the workbook will be shared. Yes, it will. It will be up on my blog, and it'll also be on my Tableau public profile. And within the workbook itself, you will also see the videos. So I embed the YouTube video straight inside of the workbook, so you can get it all in one place. So, all right. So why don't we go ahead and get started? I'm not sure if I have an hour's worth of tips this time, Dirk. So I'll just go until I run out, and then we'll just stop there. So hopefully that's okay with everybody. So what I'm going to show you here is how to create a mobile design. So in this particular example, you're looking at the best sales dashboard ever. I particularly love the tree map and this pie with about 1 million slices. So, but we want to have a really nice mobile version for our sales team because they're always on the road. So to create a mobile version, you simply click on the device preview button on the upper left-hand side of the screen. When you do that, Tableau allows you to kind of scan through different device types and get some previews and things like that. Now, for me, I typically only ever use the default, and I use phone. So because if basically the reason I do that is because if something's bigger than the phone size, I want it to just use the default. So I don't really worry about that. But let's say that I want to create a phone version of this dashboard. So I'm going to change my device type to phone. I can pick the device type. I'm going to just pick a generic phone, and then I hit add phone layout. Okay, great. And Tableau just gives you kind of this border that shows you the size of the phone screen, which is great. The first thing I do is I choose this fit width option over here on the left-hand side. So under the size, I choose fit width to make sure that whatever phone this is viewed on, whether it's bigger or smaller, it will adjust to the width of that phone. So I click on that, and then I usually just automatically change this height to match the height of my phone model. So I'm going to change this to 667. Okay. And we have something like that, and I can move some things around, and I can reorder this. But actually, for my mobile version, I have a series of sheets that I'd like to include. So for example, my mobile map, I want to have much simpler, right? So I just want a simple map like this that just shows me the regions, because I want to be able to just tap on a state and drill down into my sales for that state and the top 5 products. So essentially, I want a completely custom mobile view, totally different than the experience users will get on a device. Well, if I scroll down through my list of options here in the layout, you'll notice that none of those are on there. None of those other views that I built are available for me to use on the phone. Well, that's because they have to be in the default version. So I'm actually going to go ahead and kill my phone version there. And I'm going to go back to my default here. Now, in order to make these available, I have to put them somewhere on the dashboard, right? So so what I like to do is I'm just going to go ahead and change my object type to be floating. And I notice I've got my mobile map here. Now, I could just float this right here in the middle, but then that shows up for my users, right? I don't really like that. So I'm actually going to go ahead and get rid of my region labels as well. So that's not quite what I was looking for. Well, what I could do is I like to just kind of move it up here on the upper right. And you notice if I move too far, it turns into a red X and it disappears. So I'm just going to stick it there. And then I'm going to go to my layout tab on the upper left. So up here next to the dashboard tab, you have a layout tab. And you'll notice I can now specify the XY position. So if I go back to my dashboard, I can see my dashboard width is 900. Well, I can actually just change this to maybe like 950 in the X position. And that'll just shoot it off to the right-hand side. And then I could maybe change the height to maybe make it really small, like 10 by 10. So it's really hard for people to accidentally click on it. Now, the reason I do that is because when I publish this to Tableau server, the users, Tableau will actually only render this viewable portion of the screen, the portion that I have highlighted in blue right now. That's all that's going to get rendered because this other object is off to the side. So I just repeat that with the other objects that I need to float. So I'm just going to do that again. I'm going to go here and make this 950 again. And then I'm just going to change my height to 10 and 10. And then I'll do it one more time with my top 5 products. And again, I'll change my layout and make it 950 and 10 and 10. You don't have to do the 10 and 10, but I like doing that just in case they appear for some strange reason. The user will basically not notice it. Okay, so I've got those 3 objects over here on the side somewhere. So now if I go back to my dashboard tab and I click on device preview and I switch over to my phone version, and now if I add my phone layout, I'll go through the same steps again. So I'll do fit width 667. Okay, great. And I'm just going to start removing some of these objects. So I know I don't want my map. I don't want my cumulative sales. I can get rid of this profit ratio field. I get rid of that. I can get rid of that. Okay, so now I'm left with just kind of a blank canvas. Almost looks like a blank canvas. So let me make this font a bit smaller, and so it fits on one line. Okay, there we go. So now I have these objects over here on my custom layout here. So I've got my mobile map. Okay, so I can now drag that down, put it over here. I'm going to actually change it to not be floating. I'm going to make it tiled, and there we go. So then I'm going to go down to my my next one, my mobile sales, right? And let's do the same thing there. Let's make this one tile. Let's uncheck floating and make it tiled. And then lastly, go to my top 5 products and do that same thing again. So now I have a customized dashboard for my mobile view. Okay, so I'm going to make this fit entire view, make this one entire view. Great. Okay, so now we're all set. So now I can add my filtering as I want. So I can go here. I can say where is my use as filter? Okay, so my use as filter is missing. That's interesting. Okay, but ideally what I'd want to be able to do now is to tap on a state and have it filter down to the region. So let me just go up to my dashboard. I think I need to go back out of my preview. Let me go back here, and I'm going to actually add a dashboard action that's going to go, I'm going to filter. So let's do, you choose none of them. I want to go from my map, and I want to update. I want to update my top 5 products, and I want to update my sales. Okay, and we'll do that on select and hit OK. And now if I go back to my mobile version, I can click on central, and I see my sales for North Dakota. But notice my top 5 products are not showing. Well, that's because I need to add this to context. So let's go to that sheet. And I need to put this filter on context. So that basically forces the state filter to be applied first before the top 5 products are displayed. So let me go back now to my mobile float. And there we go. So now we have a nice simple version here. So the last thing I might do is kind of fix the height of these to make sure that they don't readjust as the screen changes. So again, I can even lasso a few if I want, whatever I want to do, and everything works nice and neat. So that's a neat way to be able to have a completely different version from your default. So again, I just float everything off to the right-hand side of the screen. All right. Next is what I want to do in this case is I'm looking at sales by day using Superstore. And what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to find the maximum date and use it to show the last n days. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and create a calculated field. And I'm going to call it my max date. And for this, I like to use a level of detail expression. So I'm just going to do mustachios, and I'm just going to do max of order date, and then put a closing mustachio. Essentially, notice I didn't put fixed, include, or exclude on here. When you don't specify any of those, that implies fixed on everything. So think of it as like your grand total, your ultimate grand total. So this is looking at the entire data set, and it's bringing back one value, which is the overall max order date. Great. Okay, so I've got my max order date now. And what I want to do is I now want to create a calculation that shows the last n days based on that max date. Okay, so I'm going to create a parameter and call this my last n days. And I'm just going to make an integer. I'm going to let my users type in whatever they want, but let's start with 14. Hit OK. And let's show that parameter control. Okay, let me move this screen out of the way a bit. All right, so we have the last n days, and really what I want to do now is filter this view to the last n days. Okay, so how can we do that? Well, I'm going to call it my date filter. Actually, I'll be a little more specific. I'll call it my last n days date filter. And what I want to do here is I want to use a date diff function, and I want to say the difference at the day level between my start date, which is my order date, and my end date, which is my max date. And I want to say that has to be less than my parameter. So I could just drag my parameter in. And I'm not saying less than or equal to, because that would only return 13 days in this case, because the most recent day is 0. So really I want to do 0 to 13. And I hit OK there. And then I can hit OK. And now I have this true false filter. I can drag that to the filter shelf, select true. And now you'll notice down here on the bottom left of my screen, it says I've got 14 marks. That's to represent 1 mark for each day. Excellent. So now I could change this to maybe 28 days. And now I see the last 28 days of sales. Or if I want to do the last 90 days of sales, I can do that as well. So that's a really neat way to be able to use a level of detail expression to show the last n days. Okay, in this next example, what I want to be able to do is each of my bars, so my green bars represent wins, my blue represents draws, and my losses, and orange represents losses. What I want to do is I want to put labels above each of these bars. Okay, so how would we go about doing that? All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go under the analysis menu. I'm going to go down to totals, and I'm going to turn on my column grand totals. All right, so now we have this big bar here at the bottom, and I'm going to right click on that and say, well, let's move that to the top. All right, fantastic. And then I'm going to go ahead and let's see, I need to go here and I need to do, I'm missing the, oops, sorry, missing the wrong object there. Sorry about that, folks. What am I forgetting here? Okay, let me go here. And then I want to check my show header. Oh, that's the wrong field. I am totally bluffing on what I'm supposed to do now. So column totals to top. I should be able to hide this. Oh, there we go. So now I want to hide. Click on the bar again, choose hide. Click on the bar one more time and choose hide. Now all I'm doing here is actually just making some space. Okay, so let's format this. And I'm going to get rid of the label as well. So let's get rid of that. And then lastly, I'm going to go ahead and just remove the lines in between the rows. So let's get rid of the grand total lines on both the header and the pane. Okay, so now we've got a bit of a gap up top. Okay, so I've calculated a reference line for my wins. Okay, so I'm going to put that at 0. So let's go ahead and drag that onto the detail shelf. And when I go to my analytics pane and drag on a reference line, I can put it across the whole table, and I could say base it off of the wins, and I want to use a custom value. So I'm just going to say wins and set. I don't want to show a line. I don't want it to recalculate. And notice how Tableau puts it at the bottom. Well, that's easy enough to fix. I'm just going to go ahead and format it. And under my alignment, I'm going to stick it at the top. There we go. So now I can customize this. I could make it maybe 14 point. I can make it bold, and I can make it green to match the color. So now we know which ones are the wins. Okay, so how do I do the same thing for the draws and the losses then? So for the draws reference line, if I edit that one, you'll see I'm saying if they're the first position, meaning if it's Leicester City, then just return the W's because I want to be at the end of the green bar. All right, so let's hit OK. And then for my losses, we're going to do something similar. So if I edit that one, I'm just adding up the wins and the draws. So let's put both of those on the detail shelf as well. And then let's go back over to the analytics pane and let's add 2 more reference lines. So the first one is going to be for our draws. And we want to customize that. We'll call this draw. What do we call wins or win? So it's called draws. And let's say no line and no recalculate. Excellent. So now if I find that line here somewhere, let's see if I can hover over it here. Okay, so let's format that. Let's make it, it looks like we're using blue for those. And I think I use 16 point, is that right? I believe. And bold, and then let's make it right and top. There we go. So now you can see the draws are represented right above the draws bar. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and remove the shading. So let's get rid of the shading on both of these. Okay, and then lastly, what I want to do is I want to add one more reference line for my losses. So a table, and let's do losses. And the computation is going to be custom. I'm going to say loss, oops, losses, or just loss, or lost, something like that, or losses, about that. And let's do no line, turn off the recalculate. All right, and then I just repeat that same process. So format the line. Let's make it 16 and bold, and it looks like it's using some kind of yellow. And turn off my shading. And then lastly, make it the right and the top. Okay, so there we go. So now, of course, I probably should use a smaller font so that it all fits. So let's make these maybe 12 point. There we go. That looks better. I'll just quickly change all three of these to 12 point. Oops, helps if I choose the right number. And then again, one more to 12 point. Okay, so now I have a nice little labels at the top of my top stacked bars. So it makes for a really, really pretty visualization. Okay, next up. All right, so in this particular case, we want to see which regions are the fastest growing. So how would we go about doing that? So normally what we would do is we would take order date, and let's say we look at it at the day level. And we would take maybe sales. Where's my sales? You can see I've got a lot of fields in here. And we could do something like that. Come on, sales, where'd you go? And we could maybe make it a running total or something like that. But what that doesn't do is it doesn't tell us how long they have been operating for. So I'm actually going to create a calculated field. I'm going to call it days since first sale. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a level of detail expression. I'm going to fix it at the region level. And that's basically saying for each region, we want to calculate the min order date. So what's the first order date? Oops, the first order date for each region. Okay, and now we want to create a second calculated field. That's days. Let's undo that. Oops, sorry, let's redo. I need to rename this one. I gave this one the wrong name. Okay, so let's copy that. This is actually the day of the first sale, not the days since the first sale. And now we want to create another field that's days since the first sale. In this case, we're going to do a date diff at the day level, comparing the day of first sale to the order date. All right, and the Tableau is going to put that down here as a measure. I'm just going to drag it up and make it a dimension and then right click on it to make it continuous. And I'm going to put that up here instead. So now instead of showing the actual date at the bottom, it's showing which one has grown the fastest. So in other words, when I hover over, I can see how many days it's taken them to get to to where they are. So you can see they all started about the same. Then it looks like the central region took off a bit while the others grew at a pretty steady pace. But what you might want to do is you might want to change that a bit. You might want to make it a cumulative percent of sales. So how long did it take each of them to get to 100% of sales? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just rebuild this again. So again, I'm going to put my day since first sale. I'm going to put sales in my rows, and I'm going to make this a running total. Okay, so we're back to that same view, but now I'm going to edit this and I'm going to add a secondary calculation on here. So right now, this is telling us for each region, calculate the running total of sales by the number of days since first sale. Okay, great. But I want that to be represented as a percentage because I want the total to end up being 100%. So I'm going to add a secondary calculation, make a percent of total, and I'm going to compute it the same way. So there we go. So now this second part is saying calculate the percent of total of days since the first sale. And there we go. So we can see kind of where the ebbs and flows of these are. Okay, so that's the cumulative percent of total sales. And then lastly, the last thing we might want to do is let's go ahead and build that view one more time. So I'm going to put sales on the rows. I'm going to put days since first sale on the columns. And again, this time I'll just make it a running total, make it simpler. So what about profit? Okay, so now I've got sales in this field here, but really I want the user to be able to pick whether they want it to be sales or profit. Okay, so let's create a quick parameter. Oops, not a calculated field. We'll do that next. So let's go ahead and create a parameter. And I'm going to just call it choose a metric. And in this case, I'm going to just go ahead and do a string. And I'm going to call it sales. And I'm just going to do 2 for now, sales or profit. But you could add more to that list if you wanted to. Hit OK. And now we have a parameter called choose a metric. And parameters don't do anything until you tell Tableau what to do with them, right? So okay, so I'm going to actually edit this table calc, and let's make it our secondary again. I meant to do that. Sorry about that. So percent of total, and then again, same way going across. Okay, perfect. All right, so now what we want to do is we want this metric to swap out based on what metric is chosen from our parameter. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drag this down to save it because that makes it a bit easier for me. Oh, and it just saved it as sales. Okay, so why don't I just double click in it? Oh, okay. So we need to do something different. So let's create a calculated field. I'm going to call it metric metric value. And I'm going to say if my choose metric equals sales, then sales, else profit, end. All right, so hit OK. And now I should have a field called metric value. Where'd it go here? Metric value. So I'm going to put that on the view instead. And then I'm just going to add my same table calculation. So running total across the table, and then add a secondary as a percent of total for each region, calculate the percent of total by day of sale. So there we go. So now I can swap out between sales and profit, and I get a different view. So what I would do on the axis in this case, so see here how my axis says percent of running total sum of metric value. That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to people. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to copy this. I'm going to copy my title, and I'm going to create a new calculated field. I'm going to call it my axis title. And I'm just going to paste that in there, and I'm going to give it a better name. Okay, so I'm going to say percent of I'm going to call it cumulative percent of total, and then I'm going to close that off, and I'm going to say plus my parameter, choose a metric. There should be double quotes, sorry. Choose a metric. Cumulative percent of total sales. Okay, axis title. So now we have a new field called axis title. I'm going to drop that onto the rows, and then I'm just going to rotate that label. And then from there, I'm going to hide my field labels for my rows, and I'm going to double click on my axis and then get rid of my axis title. So there we go. So now as I change my metric, my title of my axis dynamically changes as well. So very, very useful there. Okay. Next up, conditional formatting. All right, so what I want to do in this case is how can I color the text of my rows with the profit ratio? All right, so let's see here. So I've got profit ratio in my measures list. So let's find profit ratio. And if I put that on color, okay, we color the bars, but my labels don't get colored. Interesting. All right, so how can we fix that? Well, there's a couple things we could do. So what I want to do is I basically want to say for each, I want to return a constant value here. Okay. So we could see what my worst profit ratio here is minus 10, right? There's a couple ways. Let me show you a couple ways you can do this. I'm going to start by actually just taking my product subcategory, or actually I want to do this. I'm going to put a dummy field in here called average of 0, 0.0, because I need to be able to synchronize. And you'll see that gives me this nice little box here, all right? So what I want to do here is I'm going to actually put product subcategory onto the label. And let's go ahead and for the most part, we're going to want these to be, let's actually change this. Instead of a bar, let's make it a Gantt bar. Or no, let's make it text. Let's just make it a text field. Okay, there we go. So now it's nice and center organized, and you see how we're color coding it, right? So I could do it like that and then dual axis it. And then if I synchronize, you'll see I get something like that, but that's not really the prettiest thing in the world, is it? So, okay, what I could do is I could align these to the left. I should be able to align them to the left. Doesn't look like it's working though. Okay, so that doesn't quite give us the solution we're looking for. So let's undo, and let's keep going back. All right. So didn't quite want what we want. So really all I want to do is I want to color code these labels. So what if I find the window max of my aggregate of my profit ratio? Okay, and let's close that. Come on, there we go. There we go. Okay, so now you can see we're getting this, now I want to do the window min, sorry, not the window max, I want to do the window min because I want the lowest value. And you can see we've got minus 10%. So all of these go down to minus 10%. Okay, so if we now dual axis those and synchronize, we've now got this huge thing of bars going here on the left, right? So we should have, okay, so that's what all these bars represent here. But actually, what I want these to be is Gantt, so let's make those Gantt bars. Okay, great. So now I could put my product subcategory on the labels. And if I left align those, I could then also go to my font option here and match my mark color. And then what I would do from there is just make the label, make the size of the Gantt bars really tiny and also make them transparent. There you go. So, and then from here, I would hide my header on my top axis and then go ahead and hide the header there. So there we go. So now we've got some nice labels to do it that way. All right, so is there another way we could do this? Well, let's see what our other options are here. So if we do this for each cell, okay, so now what happened there is it worked on some of these. You'll see it put the value at the end. You see the negative ones work well because we left aligned all of those, right? Okay, so what we could do in this case is if I want all of the bars on the left, so if anything is a positive value, then we want it to display a 0. Okay, so let's give this a try. So I'm going to drag this down and save it just to save me a bit of time here. I'm going to call this my profit ratio label. And let's edit this calculation. Okay, so let's see here. So what we want to say here is we want to say if the profit ratio is bigger than 0, then 0, else give us the window min end. So let's see what that does. So essentially what I'm saying here is what I want these, my labels that are hidden behind these bars to actually be to the left of the bar. So let's hit apply, and there we go. Just like magic, we now have labels on the very left edge of each bar. Really, really like that trick. All right, that's a fun one. All right, the next thing what I want to do is sometimes you'll receive a visualization and you'll be like, you know, I'd really like to know the quick way that I could rebuild something like this. Or I want to see, you know, there seem to be lots of dimensions and measures, and this particular example isn't terribly complex, but you know, I'm sure we've all seen ones that are much more complex. So how can we figure out how somebody built this? Well, it's actually not that hard. If you just go up to worksheet menu at the top, and you go down to this describe sheet option, which hardly anybody ever uses. So if you're trying to reverse engineer something, go to the describe sheet option. And what you're going to see here is you're going to see how this sheet was built. All right, so it tells us we've got losses, draws, and wins for each team broken down by position. The color shows details about that. The data is filtered on season, which only looks at 2015, 2016. It tells you what the mark type is. It tells you stack marks are on. It even tells you what's on the rows, the columns, the filters, and the color. Fantastic. So this is a really, really great option if you need to be able to reproduce a visualization that somebody else has created. So again, you go up to Worksheet and then Describe Sheet, and you have that nice little option there. All right. Next up, we want to look at grid lines. Okay, so sometimes we'll have a visualization. I'm just going to go back to Superstore. I think I can actually close some of these data sources because I don't think I use them in this particular example. And I don't think I use world population either. I'm just trying to clean this up. Okay, so let's see here. What do we want to build? All right, so let's say that we want to build a slope graph. All right, so I'm going to just look at the last 2 years. So let's just do keep only on that. And I want to look at sales and how it changes that. And I will look at it maybe by, let's do something simple. No, let's not do something simple. Who likes simple? Let's do it by state. Let's put state on detail. And we get a nice busy view like this, right? And I could even, on the color shelf, I could put some dots on the end. All right, so we get something like that. But what I want to be able to do is, well, first off, I'd like to see these lines color-coded, right? So I'm going to need to write a calculation that compares 2015 to 2016 or 2014 sales. So let's see what I have here. So I already have a field called 2015 sales. So that's great. Okay. But if I create a calculation, I'm just going to call it increase 2015, or why don't I just say 2015, oh boy, bigger than 2014 as a question mark. And I could do the sum of 2015 sales is bigger than the sum of sales 2014. And if I do something like that, and I put that on color, notice how I get this gradual color shading, which looks pretty hideous, right? So first off, how do we overcome that issue? Okay, so all I really need to do is just wrap this in an LOD. So I want to say for each state, fixed on the state level, give me the sum of 2015 sales, and then I want to compare that to the fixed at the state level of the sum of 2014 sales, and then close that one off. All right, so let's see what that does now. Okay, well, notice that it actually moved from my measures up to my dimensions. So now if we put that on color, nice, now I get 2 colors. Perfect, so in this case, my orange means increase. I want those in the front, so I'm just gonna rearrange those. And I'm gonna make my trues green and my falses just gray. I don't really want any attention paid to the losers. Okay. So great. So we've got that. But now, let's say I want a nice little reference line because ultimately I want a line that kind of draws down this box here, right? So let's put a reference line here on the table. And oops, wrong spot here. I need to actually make this continuous first. Okay, so let me get rid of that. And if I put a reference line on my year, and I just set it to a constant of 2014, that's fine. And let's make it a nice little dotted line and hit OK. The problem now is you can see that the dotted line is in front of the marks. So you see there, it might be a tough. Let me zoom in a bit here. But you can see how the reference line is actually in front of the marks. Well, I don't really like that. I like the reference lines to be behind. So how can I get around that? Okay, well, it's really not too hard. So first off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a calculated field that returns my year. So I'm going to call it year. I'm just going to drag this down. All right, and now I have a field. It probably went down here, so let's move that up to my measures, and let's make it continuous. And then drag that. We're just going to replace that here. Okay, great. And notice how we now have some nice little reference lines in the background, right? You see that? Because it's no longer a date field, we can tell it to zoom in on those. Okay, so what I can do from this point is I'm actually going to change my years to a decimal and see how that forces the axis to zoom in a bit, right? So the last thing I need to do is change my default number format on my year to be a year with no decimals and no commas. And there we go. So now I can shrink this view down. So if I just shrink this over, I now have a nice little slope graph with some lines in the background. So the last thing I would do here is format my view and get rid of my axis rulers. And maybe I could even get rid of my grid lines, or let's get rid of my row grid lines. And heck, let's even just hide the title just to make it nice and clean. So there you go. So now you can, I just did that to make it nice and clear. I probably would keep those on there. And then I'll get rid of my, my 0 as well. So there, so now, so you can see how much cleaner this looks. And if I zoom in again like I did before, so let me zoom in here, you can see that there's no line in front of these dots. So you can use grid lines in that case to make it look a lot cleaner. Okay. Let's see. The last thing in this particular view is you can see in my tooltip, it says 2015 bigger than 2014 false. Well, if I don't want my users to see that, I'm just going to go to over here on my marks card, and I'm going to click on my my field that's on my color shelf, and I'm just going to untick this option that says include in tooltip. So as soon as I uncheck that, that field is now gone from my tooltip for good. So very, very simple to do. So again, that's just how they use grid lines instead of reference lines. Another common thing that people ask about is being able to conditionally format a tooltip. Okay, so let's look at a couple examples here. Let's just start by product subcategory, and we want to look at, let's say, let's just look at sales, something very simple. Let's make it fit entire view and sort in descending order. And what I want to look at is the profit ratio. So let's just stick profit ratio on color, right? But when I hover over, you can see that it'd be nice if I could color code my profit ratio, right? I just want it to be blue if it's positive or orange if it's negative. So one thing I could do is I could start by just profit ratio positive. And I'm going to just take my profit ratio, and I'm going to say, is that bigger than 0? Or I'll say bigger than or equal to 0, and hit OK. That's going to return a true false. And let's put that on color instead. And I'm just going to put profit ratio on the detail shelf. Okay, so now we can see we just are using the oranges and blues, but let's make the negatives red and the positives like maybe purple or something. Doesn't really matter. Or let's make them blue. Okay, so the ones that are red mean that they're not profitable. The ones that are blue are profitable. So now in my tooltip, what I would like is that profit ratio where it says minus 5% to show up in red. And for office machines where it's 14%, I want that to show up in blue. Okay, so how can we handle that? Well, first off, I'm going to go ahead and uncheck my include in tooltip for my profit ratio coloring so that it doesn't show that. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create two calculated fields. I'm going to call it positive profit ratio. And I'm going to say if profit ratio positive, then return my profit ratio. Very simple. End. Nothing particularly complicated there. And then I'm going to duplicate that field. And I noticed I spelled profit ratio wrong, or positive wrong, which is a bit annoying. So let me get rid of the extra I there. Oh, it helps if I spell it right. Sorry, things like that annoy me. And now in this case, I'm going to say profit ratio negative. And I'm going to say profit ratio, oh, nope, sorry, wrong. That's the wrong field. Sorry, I copied the wrong one. So let me delete that. And I called this my positive profit ratio. So I want to duplicate this one. Sorry, I duplicated the wrong field. And I call this one my negative profit ratio. So I'm going to say if equals false, meaning it's negative, then also give me the profit ratio. So now I've got two fields here, right? I've got negative profit ratio, positive profit ratio. So let's set the default number format for these, 2 percentage, 1 decimal. But I actually like my percentages to have a plus in the front or a minus in the back. So I'm just going to go to custom number format and update that. So now I have two new fields. I'm going to throw those onto the tooltip. And you can notice how, like right here, in my positive profit ratio, you'll see it says plus 14.2%. My profit ratio 14, but my negative profit ratio is null. And then it reverses when I get to the red one. Okay, so that tells me I'm pretty close to what I need. So I'm going to just click on my tooltip shelf. And what I'm going to do is, instead of having profit ratio here, I'm going to actually I'm going to cut and paste this one, put it there. And then I'm going to cut and paste the negative right immediately after it, and then just do a tiny bit of cleanup here. Oops. And let's make our product subcategory nice and big. But now what I can do is, for my positive profit ratio, I could just color code that blue. And for my negative profit ratio, I could color code that one in red. All right, so now what happens when we go over our tooltip? So office machines is plus 14.2% in blue. Tables is minus 5.2% in red. So that's how you do conditional formatting inside of a tooltip. All right, two more to show you. The first one is how do we calculate the difference between the 75th and the 25th interquartile range? Wow, that is a mouthful. All right. So I actually built an example like this a while ago, but I'm going to show it to you again anyway. So let's say we want to look at, let's take order date, and let's make that at the quarterly level. And we know, let's go ahead and create a calculated field. So it's called 75th percentile. 75th percentile. And let me go ahead and try to move this so I can show you what to do here. So now if I scroll down here into my fields, you'll see I have a percentile field here. So, okay, this says percentile sales 0.9. So it says it aggregates the calculation, returns a percentile. Okay, so I'm going to double click on percentile. I'm going to put sales in there. And then I want this to be at 0.75. So that would be my 70th percentile. All right, hit OK. And let's duplicate that and do it for my 25th percentile. So you simply change the name of the field, and then we change this to 0.25. So now we can drag that onto my rows, and it'll show you the 75th percentile value. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 25th percentile and I'm going to drop it on top of my 75th percentile to create a combined axis view. So now we get something like that, or maybe we could even change this. Let's say we don't like the 75th, we want to know what the 50th percentile is, which is really the median. So let's make this 0.5. Okay, and I'll change my title to make sure when you guys look at this later, you understand what it's doing. So now we can see the difference between these two, but I might want to look at this on a quarterly basis. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually duplicate my measure values field, and I get two line charts. Great. On the first one, I'm going to change this one to circles, so I get dots for each one. On the second one, I'm going to leave it as a line, but I'm going to move measure names to my path shelf. Okay, so that didn't quite work, right? Because we wanted to actually connect top to bottom. So let's change this to discrete, and now we get the view that we're looking for. Okay, so from here I'm going to make this dual axis, synchronize, and I'm going to move my lines to the back. There we go. So now we can see quarter by quarter, I can see the difference between my 75th and my 50th percentile of sales. So that can be a super handy view if that's the type of metric that you're interested in. The last one I have to show you is sometimes you want to be able to compare an individual month to the historical monthly average with a level of detail expression. Okay, so what does that mean? So let's start by looking at, let's put order date, and then let's make this month, right? So let's do month there. Oops, wrong month. Let's do this month. And what I could do is, let's move month to the detail shelf, and we get, basically one value there. And let's look at sales. Let's put sales in the rows, and let's make these circles. Okay, so essentially what we're looking at now is for each year, we can, for each, I've got these. So I want to basically calculate for each month, what is a historic monthly average. Okay, so let's do that. So my monthly average across years. So in this case, what I want to do is I want to write a level of detail expression that says, okay, fix me on the month level. So what I'm going to do is, let me close this. I'm going to actually drag this into the view because that tells me it's the date part of the month. So I want the name of the month, and I want to know the sales, the sum of sales. So that's going to say for each month, give me the sum of sales. Actually, I want to do this for each month and year. So let's make this a date trunk. This should work. Let's try it. I might be messing up my example here. And then I want to take the average of all of that. Or no, we should be able to do it this way. Let's do date part. Let's change this back. Date part. And then let's make this the average sales. Okay, so this is saying for each month, give me the average sales. All right, so that would be equivalent to going here to analytics pane and dropping on an average line for each pane. Oops, or not for each pane, we want to do it for each cell. Sorry about that, per cell. All right, and if we show the value of that, let's edit that one more time. Let's go ahead and show the value on there instead. So now we've got 351, 282. So now if I look at my monthly average sales, where to go across the years and put that on detail, we should see, okay, so see how my monthly average sales is only returning 1846. Okay, so I've done something wrong there. So I think what I want to do is I want to sum these up. Let's see what happens here if I sum these up and then take the average of that. So it's going to break that field, which is okay. And now we can see the monthly average is 128,424. Okay, so I didn't quite do this right. So let me see here. Let's make this a date trunk and hit apply. So this is where it's a lot of trial and error. Okay, so now this is telling me, notice what it's doing now is it's giving me the same value for each month and year. All right, so how do I get back to my 351? Okay, I'm actually totally blanking on how I did this one before. Let's do the average like this. Let's try it like this. Sorry, folks. You'd think I'd practice these ahead of time, wouldn't you? Okay, so that's not quite working, so why don't I just show you a different example. So maybe I'm just going to completely change the topic here, and let's say what is the total value of the top seller in each month. So what I mean by this is let's look at, for example, let's look at it by state. So let's look, okay, so, and let me change this, okay. For each state, what is the total value of the top seller in each month? Okay, so basically what I want to, I'm kind of creating a table that looks like this. So in other words, if I have Alabama and I drag order date in at the month level, no, at the detail level, let's do it like this. Okay, each day. And if I put row ID in here and add all, and then I put sales in here, essentially what I want to do is, so on Alabama for January the 3rd, the highest sale was 698, so that's the one I want to count. When I get down to the next day, there was only one sale, so I want to count 529. When I get to the 22nd, there were 3 sales, or 3 items sold, so I want to keep the 4585. Okay, so let's create a calculated field, and I'll call it largest sale per day. And what I want to do here is I want to fix this at the state and order date level, and I want to get my max sale. All right. So I should have my largest sale per day, and I drag that onto the view. And notice how in the first one I get 698 in both records. Okay, so now I could take row ID out of the view. I can even take order date out of the view. And now I know the total value of the largest sale. So if I put this up here, I know, let me put that on detail. I can sort this, and now I know that the individual largest sale per day was 1.1 million. Well, a neat thing to do here then is to create a nice little calculation. So let's say largest sale contribution. So this is where kind of the analytical process works here. So I want to say, how much did the largest sale per day, how does that compare to the overall sales per day, right? So now I could take my largest sale per day contribution. Let's default the number format for that to a percentage. And let's drag that onto color. And now we can see, let me make it a 2-color palette. We probably want to reverse this, because the reason you'd want to highlight the ones that are, you'd want so this is telling you in Maine, for example, that the single largest seller per day accounts for 97% of your sales. Well, that can't be good, because that means there's it's a less diversified portfolio. Okay, so that brings us to the top of the hour. And thank you very much. Hopefully, I don't know if there's any more questions. I'll check on here. Hopefully, people can still hear me. And yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate you guys listening, and I will have the workbook and the video up on my blog in a short amount of time. So just check over on bizwiz.com, probably in the next couple of hours, and I'll have it up for you. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a great day.